In 1949, Britain's most successful steam turbine locomotive needed a repair that the railway chose not to make. That sounds like the end of a failed experiment. It was not. London, Midland and Scottish Railway number 6202 had hauled frontline expresses, covered serious mileage, and become popular with crews who understood it. An official railway report had even examined its coal and water consumption. So if the Turbomotive worked, why did British Railways remove the turbine instead of repairing it? The answer lies in three places: inside a casing beneath the running plate, inside an unfamiliar workshop routine, and inside the almost completely new locomotive that emerged in 1952. The surviving paperwork matters because it changes the tone of the story. The Science Museum Group catalogs LMS Report No. 71, produced at Derby in June 1937. Its stated purpose was to investigate the coal and water consumption of Turbomotive Class 7P 462 No. 6202. This was not merely a publicity photograph with a futuristic name. The LMS was measuring a working express engine. But a successful test locomotive and a repeatable railway product are not the same thing, and that distinction would decide its fate. In the early 1930s, the LMS needed more power for its heaviest passenger work. William Stanier had arrived from the Great Western Railway and confronted a system with many inherited locomotive types, but no modern Pacific equal to the growing demands of the West Coast route. His Princess Royal design answered that need. The first engines were large 462 locomotives with a leading four-wheel bogie, 6 coupled driving wheels, and a 2-wheel trailing axle supporting the wide firebox. Number 6202 began within that program. It was intended as the third of the initial Princess prototypes, not as a little laboratory machine that happened to reach the main line. That point is crucial. The turbine experiment inherited the scale, boiler, and basic express purpose of a full Stanier Pacific. When it left Crewe Works in 1935, it was expected to do genuine railway work. The unusual direction came partly from Sweden. Stanier had seen non-condensing turbine locomotives operating there and worked with Henry Guy of Metropolitan Vickers on a British application. Steam turbines were already valuable where they could rotate quickly and steadily. A railway locomotive was a much harsher proposition. It had to start a heavy train, accelerate, slow, stop, reverse, and then repeat the cycle. The challenge was not simply making a turbine turn, it was converting extremely fast rotation into controlled movement at the rail. On a normal steam locomotive, steam pushes pistons back and forth in cylinders. Connecting rods turn that reciprocating motion into wheel rotation. Each exhaust beat also creates the familiar sharp blast that helps draw the fire. Turbomotive replaced the main driving cylinders with a forward turbine. Steam passed through rows of blades and spun the turbine at thousands of revolutions per minute. Reduction gearing then lowered that speed and transmitted power to the coupled wheels. The driver did not control the engine with a conventional set of valve gear cutoff positions. 6 nozzle groups admitted steam to the turbine. Opening more groups increased the flow and available power. At a representative high running speed, published technical accounts placed the turbine near 7,000 revolutions per minute. The wheels were obviously turning far more slowly. The gearing between them was not an accessory, it was the heart of the conversion. This arrangement offered a genuine mechanical advantage. The turbine produced smooth rotary motion rather than a sequence of piston thrusts. A conventional locomotive can impose alternating forces through its rods and balance weights, including the vertical track force commonly described as hammer blow. Turbomotive largely removed that particular problem from its main drive. Its pull could feel remarkably smooth, and there were fewer large reciprocating masses racing backwards and forwards on each wheel revolution. But removing piston exhaust beats created a second problem. A steam locomotive still needed a strong flow through the fire and boiler. The turbine exhausted steam continuously, without the sharp pulses that made an ordinary blast pipe work. The designers therefore had to make continuous exhaust perform the drafting job. A double blast pipe arrangement allowed the non-condensing turbine to exhaust through the chimney while maintaining the fire. One apparent simplification had forced another part of the locomotive to be reconsidered. Then there was reverse. Turbines are happiest when designed around a particular direction and speed range. Number 6202 had a separate, much smaller reverse turbine, engaged for backward movement. It was useful for limited light engine maneuvering, but it was not an equal second power unit for hauling a train tender first. In normal express service, Turbomotive had to face forward. Depots therefore needed to turn it, just as they did many conventional express locomotives. But the weakness exposed a basic tension. The turbine preferred steady one-way running, while railway operation demanded flexibility. If this is the kind of engineering evidence you want railway history to explain, leave a like and subscribe. The official service record is where the easy, failed experiment story begins to break down. Turbomotive entered service on the 29th of June, 1935, according to an engine history account published by the Stanier Mogul Fund. Its first full-year mileage is especially revealing. The same account gives 72,368 miles in 1936, while the Princess locomotives were averaging around 80,000. That is not the record of a motionless exhibition piece. It is also not proof that every experimental component was trouble-free. It tells us something more useful. The LMS was willing and able to roster the machine for substantial work. The official 1937 consumption investigation reinforces that conclusion. A railway does not need a 4-table test report to discover that a locomotive cannot perform its intended duty. Coal and water testing asks a later question: how economically does it perform that duty? Published histories describe useful economy against comparable piston locomotives, but the online museum catalog does not expose every table, so the safest conclusion is narrower. The LMS considered Turbomotive's consumption important enough to measure formally after it had entered service. On the road, the locomotive developed a reputation for smoothness. Crews had to learn controls that did not respond exactly like a conventional regulator and reverser, but reports described the engine becoming popular once that unfamiliarity was overcome. It could work heavy expresses between London Euston and the north. Photographs show it taking water from troughs and handling long passenger formations. The turbine was not solving an imaginary engineering exercise. It was driving the same railway timetable that judged every other Pacific. This is the point where the word successful needs discipline. Number 6202 did not lead to a fleet of British Turbine Pacifics. It did not make piston locomotives obsolete, and it retained weaknesses, especially at low speed and in reverse. Yet success can also mean that an experimental machine performed useful service, delivered the expected smooth rotary drive, and produced enough evidence to be assessed seriously. By that definition, Turbomotive was one of Britain's strongest turbine experiments. At the midpoint of the story, the decisive weakness changes. It was not that the locomotive could not pull an express, it was that there was only one of it. A standard class spreads knowledge, tools, spares, and training across many engines. A fitter who learns one Princess Royal can apply much of that experience to another. A unique turbine locomotive concentrates risk. A fault may require specialist knowledge. A replacement component has no fleet stock behind it. Time in the works becomes harder to predict, and every retirement or transfer can remove a piece of human experience. The Stanier Mogul Fund's history notes that fitters could be reluctant to work on the complex and unfamiliar machinery, and that the locomotive might be stopped when a conventional engine would have remained available. That does not mean workshop staff were irrational or hostile to invention. Their job was to return locomotives to traffic safely, under time pressure, with the people and equipment available. A one-off machine asked the organization to preserve a complete support system for a single running number. War made that problem sharper. The railway needed availability, repair capacity, and standard methods more than elegant experimentation. Turbomotive continued to work, but every unique feature now competed with wartime pressure and then post-war austerity. The locomotive could be mechanically effective and institutionally expensive at the same time. That is the contradiction hidden by the familiar label prototype. In 1949, trouble with the turbine brought the argument to a decision. Published railway histories describe the repair as uneconomic in the conditions of the time. Notice what that does not say. It does not say that turbines could never work on rails. It does not say number 6202 had failed on every promise. It says that restoring one aging, unique power unit could not justify its cost when the railway already understood how to build and maintain powerful conventional Pacifics. The alternative was not immediate scrapping. British Railways retained the locomotive for a radical rebuild. The boiler and useful components could contribute to a new conventional machine, while the turbine, gearing, and their special maintenance burden would disappear. In other words, the railway valued enough of number 6202 to reconstruct it, but not the technology that made it famous. Would you have repaired the unique turbine or rebuilt number 6202 as a conventional Pacific? Put your choice and reason in the comments and subscribe for the next British locomotive case. The rebuilt engine emerged from Crewe in 1952 as British Railways number 46202, Princess Anne. Calling this a simple conversion understates the work. Published accounts describe new mainframes and a 4-cylinder arrangement related to Stanier's later Coronation Pacifics. Externally and mechanically, it had moved into the conventional piston world. The long turbine drive identity was gone. What remained was an unusual hybrid history, a locomotive descended from the Princess Royal program, transformed with a coronation-style power arrangement, and given a class identity of its own. This second life creates the most brutal contrast in the story. The turbine form had served from 1935 until its withdrawal for rebuilding. Princess Anne lasted only about 2 months in traffic. On the 8th of October 1952, it was one of the locomotives heading an express that entered the wreckage at Harrow and Wealdstone after an earlier collision. The damage was beyond economic repair, and 46202 was scrapped. The wording matters. Princess Anne did not cause the disaster, and the accident was not evidence against the turbine that had already been removed. Turning the crash into a mechanical verdict would be both inaccurate and disrespectful. Its relevance is different. Chance destroyed the only physical continuation of Turbomotive before the rebuilt design could accumulate a meaningful service record. There would be no preserved locomotive through which later generations could compare the two identities. That absence has distorted memory. Famous surviving engines can be examined, steamed, filmed, and repeatedly introduced to new audiences. Number 6202 survives through photographs, reports, drawings, published recollections, and models. Its story is therefore often compressed into 2 dramatic facts. It had a turbine and it was destroyed after rebuilding. The long middle, where the experiment actually worked trains and exposed the economics of uniqueness, is easier to lose. So why did British Railways remove the turbine instead of repairing it? Not because the locomotive was incapable of express work, not because the idea produced no measurable advantages. The turbine offered smooth torque, removed the main reciprocating drive, and gave the LMS a machine worth testing and rostering. But it also created a locomotive with specialist gearing, controls, reversing limitations, and a support burden shared by no other member of the fleet. When major trouble arrived in 1949, post-war railway economics judged the unique repair, not the entire physical principle. Turbomotive was therefore a technical success that failed the test of replication. It demonstrated that a non-condensing geared turbine could power a British mainline Pacific effectively, It did not demonstrate that a railway should build and maintain a class of them when conventional steam engineering was mature, familiar, and already moving toward even larger Stanier designs. The rebuild into Princess Anne made that institutional verdict visible. Keep the valuable locomotive assets, remove the exceptional system. Look again at the long casing beneath number 6202's running plate. It is not the mark of a machine that simply did not work. It is the mark of an experiment that worked well enough to reveal a harder truth. On a railway, an engine is never only a boiler and a power unit. It is also spare parts, workshop knowledge, depot layouts, operating rules, and repeated investment. The turbine solved the problem of turning steam smoothly into motion. It could not solve the cost of being the only one.